I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd fall for someone in flannel and work boots. But there I was, standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the Rogue River, my hand wrapped in the calloused palm of a man who smelled like pine sap and diesel fuel, asking me if I trusted him enough to jump. His name was Caspian. Yeah, I know, a logger named Caspian. His parents were marine biologists who'd met on a research vessel in the Pacific, and they'd given their son this beautiful, impossible name that didn't match anything about his life. He went by Cass mostly, said it was easier when you were yelling across a worksite or ordering coffee at the truck stop off Highway 101. I'm David, by the way, just David. Nothing poetic about it. I was a software engineer from Portland who'd burned out so completely that I'd taken a leave of absence and driven south until I ran out of interstate, then kept going on back roads until I found a town that looked like it had never heard of venture capital or standing desks or any of the things that had been slowly killing me. That town was Ridgemont, population 873, tucked into the Cascade foothills, where the logging industry had been dying for 30 years, but nobody had told the loggers yet. I'd rented a cabin on Airbnb for a month. It had unreliable Wi-Fi and a wood stove and a porch that overlooked a creek, and the host had left a note saying if I needed anything, her son lived up the mountain and would be happy to help. I didn't plan on needing anything. I'd brought my laptop and my noise-canceling headphones and enough freeze-dried camping food to survive a nuclear winter. I was going to disconnect, decompress, maybe remember what it felt like to be human instead of a biological machine that converted coffee into code. That lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, I woke up to find a black bear on my porch, methodically destroying my cooler. I'd been stupid enough to leave it outside with actual food in it, and this bear was having the time of its life with my expensive organic cheese and craft beer. I did what any reasonable person would do. I stood inside, behind the glass door, and had a complete panic attack. That's when I heard the truck, this ancient Dodge that sounded like it was powered by controlled explosions and willpower, rumbling up the dirt road to my cabin. The door opened and out stepped Cass, all 6 feet 3 inches of him, with shoulders that suggested he could probably carry a refrigerator up a mountain without breaking a sweat. He took one look at the situation, grabbed something from his truck bed, and walked right up to that porch like he was approaching a neighbor's dog. He had this air horn, the kind they use at sporting events, and he just let it rip. The bear looked at him with what I swear was indignation, grabbed one last piece of cheese in its mouth, and lumbered off into the woods. Cass turned to me. His eyes were this impossible shade of green, like moss in sunlight. "You David?" he asked. I nodded, still pressed against the inside of the glass door like it was the only thing between me and certain death. "My mom said you might need some help up here." Looks like she was right. He had this voice, deep and rough around the edges, but not unkind. "You can't leave food out like that. Bears around here are fearless. They'll come right into your cabin if you let them." "I didn't know," I managed to say. "I'm from Portland." He smiled at that, just a little. "Yeah, I figured." He spent the next hour teaching me how to be bear aware, how to store food properly, what to do if I encountered one on a trail, why playing dead was actually the worst advice for black bears. He had this way of explaining things that was patient without being condescending, like he understood that not everyone grew up in the woods, but that didn't make them stupid. Before he left, he wrote his number on a piece of paper. "If you need anything," he said, "I mean it. We look out for each other up here." I should have left it at that, thanked him, watched him drive away, gone back to my solitary decompression. But something about the way he'd handled that bear, the calm competence of it, the complete absence of ego, it had done something to me. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just the way his flannel shirt had pulled across his shoulders, or the half-smile he'd given me before he left, or the fact that I hadn't felt this present in my own body in months. I texted him the next day, asked if he knew any good hiking trails. He did. He knew all of them, and somehow, over the next 2 weeks, he kept finding time to show them to me. Early morning hikes before he went to the logging site, evening walks after he'd showered off the sawdust and sweat, weekend climbs to viewpoints that took my breath away, and not just because of the altitude. We didn't talk about anything deep at first. He told me about the logging industry, how his grandfather had worked these same forests, how everything was different now with regulations and corporate ownership and timber prices that made it almost impossible to make a living. I told him about tech, about the absurdity of working 80-hour weeks to build apps that helped people order food slightly faster, about the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from succeeding at something you're not sure matters. "Sounds lonely," he said one evening. We were sitting on a ridge watching the sunset turn the sky purple and gold. "It was," I admitted. "Is, I don't know. I haven't figured out the past tense yet." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My ex-wife used to say I was married to the forest. She wasn't wrong, but at least the forest doesn't leave." That was the first time he'd mentioned being married. "How long ago?" I asked. 4 years. She moved to Eugene, remarried, has a kid now. I'm happy for her, genuinely. She deserved someone who could give her a life that wasn't covered in sawdust." "And what do you deserve?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something passed between us that I couldn't name. "Haven't figured that out yet," he said. I kissed him 3 days later. We'd been hiking to a place he called the Cathedral, this grove of old-growth Douglas firs that had somehow survived every logging cycle, protected by terrain too steep to make it profitable. The trees were massive, ancient, the kind that make you feel like you're standing in a living temple. We'd stopped to rest, and he was telling me about the ecosystem, how these old trees supported hundreds of species, how the whole forest was really one organism connected by fungal networks underground. He got animated when he talked about the woods, his hands moving, his whole face lighting up, and I just thought, I want to know what it feels like to be something he cares about that much. So I kissed him, just leaned in and pressed my lips to his, tasting the salt of his sweat and the mint from the gum he'd been chewing. For a second, he froze. Then his hand came up to the back of my neck, and he kissed me back like he'd been thinking about it just as much as I had. When we broke apart, he was breathing hard. "David," he said, I haven't." "I know," I said. "We don't have to define it." "I've never been with a man before," he said. "I mean, I've thought about it, wondered. But I was married, and then I was divorced, and in a town this small, you don't exactly experiment." "We can take it slow," I said. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "I don't know how to do slow. I'm either all in or I'm nowhere." "Then be all in," I said, "with me, for however long this lasts." That night, he took me to his cabin. It was further up the mountain, more isolated than mine, with solar panels and a water catchment system and shelves full of books about forestry and climate science and science fiction novels with broken spines. His bed was a mattress on a simple frame, covered in quilts his grandmother had made. And when we undressed each other, it felt sacred somehow, like we were in another cathedral made of wood and want. He was gentle, almost reverent, his rough hands surprisingly tender on my skin. "Tell me what you like," he whispered. "I want to make this good for you." And it was good. It was better than good. It was the kind of intimacy I'd forgotten was possible, where you're completely present with another person, where every touch means something, where you're not performing or optimizing or thinking about anything except the way his breath feels against your neck and the weight of his body and the small sounds he makes when you touch him in ways that unmake him. Afterward, we lay tangled in his quilts, and he traced patterns on my chest with his fingertips. "I think I've been lying to myself for a long time," he said quietly. "About what?" "About what I want, who I am. I told myself the divorce was about incompatibility, about different life goals, and that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I think part of me always knew I was attracted to men. I just didn't have the courage to admit it." I kissed his forehead. "You're admitting it now." "Because you made it safe," he said. "You showed up in your Portland fleece and your expensive hiking boots, completely unprepared for bears, and somehow that made it okay for me to be unprepared too." We fell into a routine after that. I'd work in the mornings, actually managing to write some code that didn't feel soul-crushing, and he'd come by after his shifts. We'd cook dinner together, these simple meals made from whatever was in season at the farmer's market in town. We'd sit on the porch and watch the stars come out, talking about everything and nothing. We'd make love in my cabin or his, learning each other's bodies like new languages. He introduced me to his friends, the other loggers and their families, and if anyone thought it was strange that he was suddenly spending all his time with the tech guy from Portland, they didn't say anything. Or maybe they did say things, but Cass didn't tell me about it. He had this way of creating a bubble around us, making it feel like the only opinions that mattered were ours. 3 weeks into my month-long stay, he asked me if I wanted to do something special. "There's this place," he said, "a swimming hole on the Rogue River. The water's deep and cold and perfect, and there's a cliff where people jump. I've been going there since I was a kid." "How high is the cliff?" I asked. "High enough to be exciting, not high enough to be stupid." He grinned. "Probably about 30 feet. The river's deep there, carved out by centuries of current. It's completely safe if you know where to jump." I'd never been a thrill seeker. I was the kid who preferred books to sports, who'd chosen a career where the biggest physical risk was carpal tunnel syndrome. But something about the way he described it, the excitement in his voice, made me want to try. We drove out on a Sunday morning, his truck rattling over Forest Service roads, until we reached a trailhead I never would have found on my own. We hiked down to the river, and the swimming hole was exactly as beautiful as he'd promised. The water was this incredible blue-green, so clear you could see the rocks on the bottom, surrounded by cliffs and forest and sky. There were a few other people there, locals who greeted Cass by name and sized me up with friendly curiosity. We swam for a while, the cold water shocking and invigorating, and then Cass climbed out and started making his way up the cliff path. "You coming?" he called down to me. My heart was pounding, but I followed him. The path was steep and narrow, carved into the rock face, and by the time I reached the top, I was breathing hard. The view was incredible, but it was also terrifying. 30 feet looked a lot higher from up here. Cass stood at the edge, completely relaxed, like he'd done this 1,000 times, which he probably had. "You just step off," he said. "Keep your body straight, feet together. The water's deep enough, I promise." I looked down at the river. It seemed very far away. "I can go first," he offered. "Show you it's safe." "No," I said. "I want to do it. I just need a minute." He moved closer to me, and then he did something that surprised me. He took my hand. Right there, in front of everyone, he laced his fingers through mine and squeezed. "I've got you," he said quietly. "We can jump together if you want. Or you can go alone. Or we can climb back down and there's no shame in it. But if you want to do this, I'm right here." I looked at him, this man who'd taught me how to be present, how to be brave, how to be honest about what I wanted, and I realized this wasn't just about jumping off a cliff. This was about trust, about being willing to take leaps even when you couldn't see the landing. "Together," I said. He smiled, this brilliant, genuine smile that made him look younger. "On 3. On 3." We counted down together, our hands clasped tight. 1, 2, 3, and we stepped off the edge. The fall was terrifying and exhilarating and over too quickly. The water hit like a shock of cold electricity, and I plunged deep, disoriented for a moment before I found which way was up. I kicked hard and broke the surface, gasping, and Cass was right there, laughing, water streaming down his face. "You did it!" he shouted, and pulled me into a kiss right there in the river, in front of everyone, like he didn't care who saw. When we climbed out, one of the locals, an older guy with a gray beard, clapped Cass on the shoulder. "Good to see you happy, man," he said. "It's been a while." That night, back at Cass's cabin, we lay in bed and talked about the future. My month was almost up. I was supposed to go back to Portland, back to my job, back to my life. "What if you stayed?" Cass asked. "Not forever, necessarily, but longer. See what this could be." "I have a lease in Portland, a job, a whole life." "Do you want that life?" he asked. "Or are you just going back because it's what you're supposed to do?" I didn't have an answer, not then. But I lay awake long after he fell asleep, listening to his breathing, feeling the weight of his arm across my chest. And I thought about what it meant to jump when someone told you the water was deep enough. In the morning, I called my boss, asked for an extension on my leave. Then I called my landlord and arranged to sublet my apartment. Cass listened from the kitchen, making coffee, and when I hung up, he didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. That was 6 months ago. I'm still here in Ridgemont. I found a remote contract job that pays well enough and doesn't require me to pretend I care about disrupting industries. Cass and I moved in together, into his cabin, because it has better solar panels, and I've grown to love the isolation. It hasn't been perfect. We've had fights about stupid things like whose turn it is to drive to town for groceries, and serious things like what it means that I'm openly gay and he's still figuring out his identity. We've had to navigate the complexity of being in a relationship in a small town where everyone knows everyone and not everyone is accepting. His ex-wife found out, and there was a difficult conversation about why he hadn't figured this out while they were married. But we're making it work, because at the end of the day, he's the person who taught me that sometimes the scariest thing is exactly what you need. That trust isn't about knowing you won't fall, it's about believing someone will be there when you do. Last week, we went back to the swimming hole. The water was colder now, with autumn settling in, but we climbed up to the cliff anyway. This time, I didn't hesitate at the edge. I took his hand, and we jumped together, and in that moment of freefall, I understood something fundamental. Love is a lot like jumping off a cliff. You can't think your way through it. You can't optimize it or plan for every contingency. You just have to trust that the water is deep enough, that the person holding your hand knows what they're doing, and that even if it's terrifying, it's worth it. Cass pulled me close in the water, his arms around my waist, and kissed me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. And maybe I was. Maybe we both were, for each other. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For holding my hand, for telling me to jump, for making me believe the water was deep enough." He smiled against my lips. "It always was, David. You just needed someone to show you." We're planning a trip to Portland next month. He wants to see where I used to live, meet my friends, understand the life I left behind. And after that, we're talking about something bigger, maybe buying land together, building something that's ours. He wants to start a sustainable forestry consulting business, using his knowledge to help landowners manage their forests in ways that honor both ecology and economy. I want to help him build it, use my tech skills for something that actually matters. I don't know if we'll last forever. Nobody does. But I know that right now, in this moment, I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm living in a cabin in the woods with a man who smells like pine and kisses like he means it. And every day I'm learning new ways to be brave. Sometimes I think about that first day, standing at the edge of the cliff, terrified and exhilarated and completely out of my depth. Cass had said the river was deep enough to jump, and I'd believed him. Not because I knew for certain he was right, but because something in his voice, in his eyes, in the way he held my hand, made me want to try. That's what love is, I think. It's standing at the edge of something that terrifies you and jumping anyway, because the person next to you makes you believe in possibilities you never imagined. It's trust in its purest form, stripped of certainty, built entirely on faith and hope and the courage to be vulnerable. Cass is in the kitchen now, making dinner. I can hear him humming, off-key and unself-conscious, and it's the most beautiful sound in the world. In a few minutes, I'll join him. We'll cook together, eat together, maybe go for an evening walk through the forest he loves so much. And later, we'll lie in bed and talk about our dreams, our fears, our plans for a future we're building one brave choice at a time. The logger said the river was deep enough to jump. He held my hand on the edge, and when we stepped off together into nothing but air and trust, I learned that sometimes the best things in life require you to fall before you can fly.